All right, guys, I didn't really mean to make this video, but I've been dying to get my hands on the GFX 100S. I've tried the 50S2, the original 100. I own the 50R and the 50S at some point, and they are still just my favorite files and kind of my favorite camera. I don't know if I said my favorite camera, but anyways, I recently just got the XH2S. I was gonna get the XH2, but I'm impatient. I still might get it. We'll see. I'm waiting to see if anyone's gonna do a comparison on the files. Rented this out just using my shoot, and I was like, hey, I might as well put them head to head to see how they did. We're gonna go over a bunch of files here, but first I'm just going to start from my user experience. I recall when I owned the 45mm and the 110mm for the GFX, those focus pretty fast. I rented the 45 to 100 zoom though. For the most part, it did okay, but it still struggled in comparison to this guy. This thing just really shined. If you've been subscribed for a while, you know I have the R5 and the R5C. Those things are autofocus beast. I think this might be a tiny bit better just in my experience so far. I would shoot with this because I love the way that the cameras look through the viewfinder and the back of the LCD. You could kind of see the dynamic range and the color that this gets, which we'll see in the files. And then when I switched to this, the viewfinder is actually very nice in this, but the photos look more contrasty and the saturation lacked a little bit. So I actually went and pumped up the saturation in my viewfinder, and I tweaked my my curves a little bit in camera just to kind of get it on par. But this thing, you can still tell this has a specific look to it. So I would kind of favor this, and then I picked this up. It was like kind of a weight off my shoulders because I was able just to shoot more and direct more, like direct the model more, because I didn't have to worry about focusing and it locking up. That was the one thing that kept happening on this, like a focus point, it would get stuck tracking on something and I have to turn it off to make it stop, turn it back on. I don't know. It was the whole thing. Again, the original reason I rented this camera was to see if I want to buy this, and it still didn't really answer my question. So I had a lost. We're going to be going through a lot of different photos here. I started to shoot a lot of these back to back after I realized that I was going to be making this video. So these actually kind of match up fairly well. All right, guys, so I have the photos fully resetted. I put them on film standard. That's just Capture One's color profile. I'm used to editing on this profile. I've been doing it for years. And so to me, it's like one of the better color profiles if you're doing editing. But let me show you how much dynamic range is in this GFX file. Let's start by just pulling up the exposure and bring down the whites and the highlights. You see we have all that dynamic range on there. So now let's go to the XH2S file. Let's drop the highlights and the shadows like we did. You see we still have all that dynamic range in there. And then also if I raise the shadows, you see we still have all the details in there as well. If I do on the XH2S, we still have a lot of details in there as well. This is an underexposed shot on the XH2S. Let me show you. Like this sensor's amazing. Like they really did a great job on this. So now this is the GFX. Again, the zoomed all the way out to 45mm on that lens. Then this is the 23mm. Obviously totally, I was like, oh, right in her face on this one. This one I'm like 4 feet back. So totally different looks. But you can see I'm getting the match up pretty well. So these are pretty much straight out of camera here. As you see, the GFX file just looks great just from the get-go. And then with some tweaks, XH2 gets close to it, but you can still see that GFX has like that milky texture to it. But let's go and boost these exposures up a little bit. And again, this is the newer 23mm, so this thing should hold better. Zoom in 100% to the GFX, 100% XH2S, how much you could punch in. With the new lens for the X series cameras, these things are really giving you a jump in quality on these cameras. The GFX skin tones just look better to me. The X ones don't look bad at all. You could still, like, if I was just looking at the X one without looking at the GFX, this looks great, but it does have that punchy, like, you can see the way the shadows right here, they're a little bit sharp, and on the GFX, they're just smooth. And that's because I think the sensor's reading out like 12-bit RAW on the XH2S, and on GFX it's 16 bits. So all those extra little bits of color are getting packed into there, and it's just giving you a smoother gradation on your skin tones. So you see again, obviously this is the GFX right here, zoomed in at 100mm on that lens, and the 56, the original 56mm. You see they still get pretty close, but again, let's clone these. And then these both have classic negative on there. Let me just raise the shadows on them. So now these are both with the Capture One color profile. Just, I don't know, it's the roll off on everything from the color saturation to the highlights and shadows. It's just so freaking good on the GFX. Is it $6,000 good? All right, I'm gonna start blasting. It's gonna take too long on this, but I just want to zoom into the skin again right here real quick. Her skin's getting a little bit blocky here. There's like random color just being introduced to where on the GFX, you kind of see it, but everything just like is more smooth. It's more filmic-like. So again, this is the XH2S, this is the GFX. And then another thing is too, with wider lenses on the GFX, you get less distortion. So you can see with the 23mm XH2S, how the baseball little fence thing back here has an angle to it compared to the 45mm on the GFX, which is like a basically 35mm. It looks more straight back there. Let me do the crop again just to make it just a little bit more easier. So 23mm on here, 45mm on here. So even from my eye, like again, the GFX just has a little bit more of that filmic pop to it, just because I think it comes down more to the sensor size and the lens. So see, we could still punch in way more to the GFX 100S, like all these details on her belt and everything, and the color of the dress, everything. Let's zoom into 200% on the XH2S. You see it starts falling apart. And this is the 23mm too, so this thing's extra sharp. But zoomed out, I mean, I don't think most people could tell the difference, but definitely GFX is catching my eye there. Now the last shot to round this off is a nighttime shot. There was a UV filter that I forgot to take off the GFX. You can see the settings are way different. I'm at 1250 ISO on the GFX, 1/60th of a second. I'm scared to go any lower than that, just because if you go lower on that, you can get more blur into there. So 1/6 is like the lowest I'm comfortable going, even though there is IBIS. It's just how I am. But even at 1250 ISO, you can see the file is freaking clean. There's some noise in here, but this is just insane. So even though we're at ISO 160 on the XH2S, you could see the difference. Like the fact that this is 1250 ISO and it's just as clean as the 160 ISO, that says a lot in my opinion about this. You can see it looks pretty good. So yeah, I will say while we're comparing this, having a zoom lens on the GFX and when you're shooting flash, this thing allows you, I don't know, there's give and takes to media format. One, you can't go lower in the shutter speeds. You can hear it clunk. If you're at like 1/25th of a second, you hear a clunk, clunk. When you're shooting 1/25th on this, it's way faster. So when you're shooting fashion and stuff, you don't want any blurriness. You don't want crazy bokeh. It's one big misconception. If you have crazy bokeh and you're shooting for a fashion brand and the eyes in focus, but the clothes are blurry, what the hell is the fashion brand supposed to do with that? So you usually want to drop your aperture down at least to like f4 at minimum. And then I'll go all the way to like f8 sometimes if I have to. With that, when you're shooting certain lengths and you're trying to shoot flash, sync speed on here I think is 1/25th, which is a downside, because on here I think it's 1/200th or 1/250th, which helps a lot because you don't have to use NDs then sometimes. So say if you're stuck at 1/25th on here, you might have to go down to like f8, and f8 on a crop sensor is going to look like, I don't know, f16 on a full frame camera. So when you're going to 1/25th on here, again, you're losing like another stop there, but if you close down to f8 on here, it still looks like f5.6 on a full frame, if that any of that made sense. So there's little like ways that you could cheat stuff here, and there's give and takes to both ends. This is the GFX 100 right here. This is the H2S. See the size there? They're actually kind of similar. The GFX definitely feels way more beefy. The XH2S is a little bit more smaller there. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much it. Again, none of my questions were answered in this, and I'm assuming for some of you guys, it maybe answered the question for some of you guys. Maybe it did. I don't know. This video is kind of pointless, I guess, but my curiosity is even more heightened. So yeah, that's it. Peace.